Lady Cordelia's chemistry knowledge was the most advanced in the kingdom, but the invisible poisons emerging from her laboratory were never detected by anyone. Her odorless and colorless formulas were the key to perfect crime. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background. And let's begin our journey together tonight. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Crystal Laboratory revealed a workspace that seemed to bridge the gap between medieval alchemy and the emerging science of the modern age. Lady Cordelia Blackwell moved among her apparatus with the precision of a master clockmaker, her delicate hands manipulating glass vessels and measuring instruments that represented the cutting edge of chemical knowledge in Victorian England. At 31, Cordelia possessed both the intellectual brilliance and refined beauty that made her the most celebrated female scientist in the kingdom. Her auburn hair was always neatly arranged to avoid interference with her work, while her emerald eyes held the focused intensity of someone who saw possibilities that others could never imagine. Her laboratory coat, tailored to fit her elegant figure, had been designed to project both professional competence and feminine grace that made her acceptable in circles where women of science were typically viewed with suspicion. The Crystal Laboratory itself had been established through royal patronage that recognized Cordelia's exceptional talents while providing her with resources that few researchers could access. King Edward himself had commissioned her appointment as royal chemist, a position that gave her unprecedented freedom to pursue investigations into pharmaceutical applications that could benefit both the crown and the kingdom's most distinguished citizens. The equipment that filled her laboratory represented thousands of pounds worth of investment in apparatus that had been acquired from the finest instrument makers across Europe. Distillation columns reached toward the ceiling like glass trees, while precision balances capable of measuring substances to the milligram sat beside heating devices that could maintain exact temperatures for extended periods. Most impressive of all were the spectroscopic instruments that allowed Cordelia to analyze the composition of unknown substances with accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. But it was Cordelia's theoretical knowledge rather than her equipment that truly set her apart from every other chemist in the kingdom. Her understanding of molecular interactions, chemical bonding, and physiological effects had been developed through intensive study of texts that existed in only a handful of libraries throughout Europe, combined with original research that pushed the boundaries of what contemporary science considered possible. The pharmaceutical preparations that had established Cordelia's reputation were marvels of chemical artistry that could address medical conditions which conventional treatments had proven unable to cure. Her remedies for nervous disorders, digestive complaints, and circulatory problems had earned praise from the kingdom's most distinguished physicians, while her cosmetic preparations had made her a favorite among society ladies who sought to maintain their beauty through scientifically advanced methods. Lord Pemberton had been among Cordelia's most enthusiastic supporters, his own experience with her therapeutic compounds having convinced him that she possessed abilities that transcended ordinary pharmaceutical knowledge. His chronic digestive problems, which had resisted treatment by every physician in London, had been completely resolved through a course of Cordelia's specially formulated tablets that addressed not only his immediate symptoms but the underlying metabolic dysfunction that had caused his condition. The consultation that would prove to be Lord Pemberton's last had taken place in Cordelia's private office, where she conducted detailed interviews with clients whose conditions required personalized treatment approaches. Her assessment of his case had involved not only medical history but also analysis of his lifestyle, dietary habits, and stress factors that might influence how different therapeutic compounds would affect his particular constitution. The compound that Cordelia had prepared for Lord Pemberton's treatment had been her most sophisticated creation yet, a colorless and odorless liquid that could be added to any beverage without detection, while providing effects that would address both his immediate health concerns and certain other considerations that he had not explicitly requested. The preparation had been designed to demonstrate the full extent of her capabilities while serving objectives that extended beyond mere medical treatment. Lord Pemberton's initial response to the new medication had been exactly what Cordelia had led him to expect. His digestive symptoms had disappeared entirely within days of beginning the treatment, while his overall energy and mental clarity had improved to levels that he had not experienced in years. His enthusiastic testimonials about Cordelia's work had generated additional clients who sought similar improvements to their health and vitality. But the compound that had produced such remarkable initial benefits had been formulated to achieve effects that would become apparent only after extended use, involving chemical modifications to cellular metabolism that would create dependency while gradually undermining the physiological systems that sustained life. The beauty of Cordelia's approach lay in the fact that these delayed effects would appear to be unrelated to the medication that had initially provided such obvious improvements. Lord Pemberton's decline had begun 3 months after starting his treatment, with symptoms that seemed to indicate the return of his original digestive problems combined with new complications that his physicians attributed to the progression of underlying conditions that the medication had temporarily masked rather than cured. The gradual nature of his deterioration had prevented anyone from connecting his worsening health to the continued use of Cordelia's supposedly beneficial compound. The medical consultations that had followed Lord Pemberton's return of symptoms had involved multiple physicians who examined his case with increasing puzzlement as conventional treatments proved ineffective against conditions that appeared to be advancing despite their best efforts. Cordelia herself had been consulted about possible modifications to his medication regimen, her professional recommendations being sought by doctors who respected her expertise while remaining ignorant of her true objectives. The adjustments that Cordelia had made to Lord Pemberton's treatment had been presented as necessary responses to his changing condition, involving modifications to dosage and frequency that would supposedly address the complications that had developed during his extended therapy. In reality, these changes had accelerated the toxic effects of compounds that were systematically destroying his ability to process nutrients and maintain cellular function. Lord Pemberton's death had been attributed to complications arising from chronic digestive disorders that had proven resistant to all available treatments, with his physicians concluding that some underlying genetic or developmental factor had made his condition ultimately incurable, despite the temporary improvements that Cordelia's innovative therapies had initially provided. The autopsy had revealed no evidence of poisoning, as the compounds responsible for his decline had been metabolized completely, leaving only the cellular damage that appeared consistent with natural disease progression. Cordelia's grief at losing such a valued client had been entirely convincing, her professional disappointment at being unable to save someone who had trusted her expertise, enhancing rather than undermining her reputation within London's medical community. Her detailed case notes documenting Lord Pemberton's treatment had been shared with other physicians as educational material that might help them better understand similar conditions, while her willingness to waive fees for his final consultations had demonstrated the personal dedication that made her such a respected practitioner. The funeral that marked the end of Lord Pemberton's life had been attended by many of London's most distinguished figures, including Cordelia herself, who had contributed a wreath of flowers that had been treated with preservative compounds of her own formulation. Her presence at the ceremony had been noted by potential clients who interpreted her personal involvement in her patients' welfare as evidence of the exceptional care that her services provided. Yet even as society mourned Lord Pemberton's passing, demand for Cordelia's pharmaceutical preparations had continued to grow. The temporary success that her treatments had provided had convinced other wealthy clients that her innovative approaches offered hope for conditions that conventional medicine had deemed hopeless, while the unfortunate progression of his case had been viewed as evidence of the severity of problems that even the most advanced science could not always overcome. Lady Catherine Ashworth had been among the first to seek Cordelia's assistance following Lord Pemberton's death, her own chronic fatigue and nervous symptoms having resisted treatment by multiple physicians who had been unable to identify the underlying causes of her complaints. Catherine's wealth and social position had made her an attractive client, while her symptoms had provided perfect opportunities for demonstrating therapeutic approaches that could achieve dramatic improvements while serving additional purposes that she would never suspect. The initial consultation with Lady Catherine had revealed a personality profile that suggested she would be an ideal subject for testing new formulations that Cordelia had been developing, compounds that could produce behavioral modifications along with the therapeutic effects that would provide cover for their true applications. Catherine's suggestible nature and her desperate desire for improvement had made her particularly suitable for experiments that required subjects who would comply with complex treatment regimens without questioning their necessity. The compound that Cordelia had prepared for Lady Catherine had been designed to address not only her stated symptoms, but also to create the foundation for a long-term therapeutic relationship that would provide opportunities for extensive research into the effects of various chemical modifications on human physiology and behavior. The colorless and tasteless preparation could be administered in any beverage, while its effects would develop so gradually that Catherine would attribute any changes to natural recovery rather than chemical intervention. As autumn settled over London, Cordelia had begun to understand that her position as royal chemist provided more than just scientific opportunities. It offered perfect cover for investigations into human chemistry that conventional ethical constraints would never have permitted. Lord Pemberton's case had demonstrated that she possessed abilities that transcended ordinary pharmaceutical knowledge, while Lady Catherine's treatment promised to explore new frontiers in chemical influence over human consciousness and behavior. The laboratory that had been established to serve the medical needs of the kingdom's elite had evolved into something far more sophisticated and dangerous, a facility where the boundaries between healing and harming had been eliminated in favor of pure scientific inquiry into the possibilities that chemical manipulation could provide. Cordelia had discovered that the perfect laboratory assistant was an unwitting subject who paid handsomely for the privilege of participating in experiments whose true nature they could never comprehend. The development of Cordelia's invisible poisoning techniques had begun during her student years at Edinburgh University, where her exceptional performance in chemical studies had earned her access to advanced texts that described pharmaceutical applications considered too dangerous for standard curricula. Her professor, Aldrich Moorcock, had recognized in her the rare combination of intellectual brilliance and moral flexibility that would enable her to explore territories that more conventional students would find ethically troubling. The private tutorials that Dr. Moorcock had conducted for his most promising pupil had covered topics that official university courses could never address, including the preparation of compounds that could influence human behavior and physiology in ways that appeared entirely natural to outside observation. These sessions had taken place in his personal laboratory, where equipment capable of synthesizing molecules that existed nowhere in nature enabled investigations into chemical possibilities that pushed the boundaries of contemporary scientific understanding. The theoretical foundation for Cordelia's later innovations had been established through careful study of how different chemical compounds affected cellular metabolism, nervous system function, and the various physiological processes that sustained human life. Moorcock's research had revealed that properly designed molecules could interfere with these systems in ways that produced death through mechanisms that appeared to be natural disease progression rather than external intervention. The key insight that would shape Cordelia's entire approach to chemical assassination had come through understanding that the most effective poisons were those that worked by disrupting normal bodily functions rather than introducing obviously foreign substances that could be detected through autopsy or chemical analysis. By mimicking or interfering with naturally occurring biological compounds, synthetic toxins could produce fatal effects while leaving evidence that would be indistinguishable from death by natural causes. Cordelia's first independent experiments had been conducted using laboratory animals that provided opportunities to test various formulations while developing expertise in the precise measurements and timing required for optimal results. Her research had focused on creating compounds that would remain undetectable in biological tissues, while producing effects that could be precisely controlled through modifications to molecular structure and dosage. The breakthrough that had enabled her subsequent success had come through discovering methods for creating chemical compounds that would degrade into harmless byproducts after achieving their intended effects, leaving no trace evidence that could be detected even by the most sophisticated analytical techniques available to contemporary science. This self-destroying characteristic made her poisons virtually impossible to detect, even when investigators suspected that chemical intervention might have been involved. The establishment of her reputation as a legitimate pharmaceutical researcher had required developing genuine therapeutic compounds that could demonstrate her abilities while providing cover for more sinister investigations. Cordelia's early career had involved creating medicines that actually cured various ailments, establishing credibility that would later enable her to distribute toxic substances without arousing suspicion about their true nature. The first human applications of her assassination techniques had been conducted on subjects whose deaths would appear to be natural consequences of existing medical conditions, ensuring that her methods could be tested without creating circumstances that might attract unwanted investigative attention. Elderly patients with chronic illnesses had provided ideal test subjects, as their deaths could be attributed to disease progression rather than external intervention. The refinement of her poisoning methods had required extensive experimentation with different molecular structures and delivery mechanisms that would ensure optimal effectiveness while maintaining complete invisibility to detection. Some compounds worked by interfering with cardiac function in ways that produced heart failure indistinguishable from natural causes, while others affected nervous system chemistry to create the appearance of stroke or other neurological catastrophes. The development of her signature colorless and odorless formulations had represented the culmination of years of research into chemical properties that would enable toxic substances to be administered without detection by any of the human senses. These compounds could be added to food, beverages, or even cosmetic preparations without altering taste, smell, appearance, or texture in ways that might alert intended victims to their presence. The psychological aspects of perfect poisoning had proven to be as important as the chemical components, requiring understanding of how victims' expectations and medical knowledge could be manipulated to ensure that symptoms would be attributed to natural causes rather than deliberate intervention. Cordelia had learned to select toxins that produced effects consistent with ailments that her victims might reasonably be expected to develop based on their age, lifestyle, and medical history. The timing mechanisms that Cordelia had incorporated into her most sophisticated formulations had enabled precise control over when toxic effects would begin manifesting, allowing her to establish alibis and create circumstances that would deflect suspicion away from herself when deaths eventually occurred. Some compounds could be programmed to remain dormant for weeks or months before activating, while others could be designed to produce effects that would accelerate existing medical conditions in ways that appeared to be natural disease progression. The customization of toxic formulations for individual victims had become one of Cordelia's most specialized skills, involving detailed analysis of each target's medical history, physical characteristics, and lifestyle factors that would influence how different chemical compounds would affect their particular physiology. This personalized approach ensured optimal results while maintaining the appearance of natural death that was essential to avoiding detection. The quality control procedures that Cordelia had established for her poisoning operations had involved testing each batch of toxic compounds using methods that verified both effectiveness and invisibility, ensuring that variations in synthesis or storage conditions would not compromise the reliability of her assassination tools. Her laboratory had been equipped with apparatus that could detect even trace amounts of foreign substances, enabling her to confirm that her formulations would remain undetectable even under intensive forensic examination. The supply chain management that supported Cordelia's assassination activities had required establishing relationships with chemical suppliers who could provide exotic raw materials without maintaining records that might eventually link her to the purchase of substances that could be used for harmful purposes. Her legitimate pharmaceutical research had provided perfect cover for acquiring materials that would have aroused suspicion if ordered by someone without appropriate scientific credentials. The documentation that Cordelia had maintained regarding her poisoning techniques had been disguised as legitimate research notes covering pharmaceutical applications that appeared to be entirely beneficial, creating records that would support her reputation as a dedicated healer, while concealing evidence of activities that would have resulted in immediate arrest and execution if discovered by authorities. The training procedures that had enabled Cordelia to master increasingly sophisticated poisoning methods had involved systematic progression through techniques of escalating complexity and danger, beginning with compounds that produced temporary illness and advancing to formulations capable of causing permanent disability or death. Each stage of this education had required demonstrating competence with existing methods before gaining access to more advanced knowledge. The ethical framework that justified Cordelia's assassination activities had been based on utilitarian calculations that weighed the benefits of removing problematic individuals against the costs of allowing them to continue causing harm to others. Her victims had been selected not through personal animosity, but through careful analysis of their roles in creating social, political, or economic problems that could be resolved more efficiently through chemical intervention than through conventional legal or social processes. The expansion of Cordelia's capabilities beyond individual assassinations to encompass systematic elimination programs had required developing production methods that could generate sufficient quantities of toxic compounds to support multiple simultaneous operations while maintaining the quality standards necessary to ensure consistent results. Her laboratory had evolved from research facility to manufacturing center capable of supplying assassination services to clients whose requirements exceeded what individual poisonings could achieve. The integration of her chemical expertise with business acumen had enabled Cordelia to create a criminal enterprise that operated within the legitimate pharmaceutical industry while serving clients whose objectives required solutions that conventional commerce could never provide. Her success had demonstrated that the most effective forms of crime were those that appeared to be humanitarian activities, serving the public good while generating substantial profits through methods that transcended traditional ethical limitations. The perfect formula that Cordelia had achieved represented more than technical accomplishment. It embodied a philosophical approach to problem solving that treated human life as a chemical system that could be optimized through selective intervention, creating benefits for society as a whole, while eliminating individuals whose continued existence interfered with progress and prosperity. The systematic application of Cordelia's perfected assassination techniques had required developing a comprehensive understanding of London's social and political landscape that would enable her to identify targets whose elimination would serve multiple objectives while generating maximum profit from each chemical intervention. Her position as royal chemist provided perfect cover for studying the personal circumstances, medical vulnerabilities, and political connections of individuals whose deaths could benefit paying clients. Duchess Margaret Fairfax had been selected for termination through a commission that involved three separate parties whose interest converged on ensuring her death occurred before certain inheritance arrangements could be finalized. The Duchess's control over vast estates and business interests had created obstacles to development projects that required land consolidation, while her political influence had been used to oppose commercial enterprises that her environmental concerns had led her to consider harmful to public welfare. The challenge of eliminating someone who possessed both political connections and substantial resources had required developing approaches that could overcome enhanced security measures while maintaining complete invisibility to the investigative capabilities that such a high-profile target's death would inevitably attract. Cordelia's solution had involved exploiting the Duchess's well-known hypochondria and her tendency to seek experimental treatments for minor ailments that conventional medicine could easily address. The consultation that would prove fatal had been arranged through intermediaries who presented Cordelia's services as representing the cutting edge of European pharmaceutical research, emphasizing her royal appointment and academic credentials while suggesting that her treatments could address health concerns that traditional approaches had failed to resolve. The Duchess's vanity about maintaining her youthful appearance had provided additional motivation for seeking access to advanced chemical preparations. The compound that Cordelia had prepared for Duchess Margaret's treatment had been designed to exploit the interaction between her existing medications and natural biochemical processes that would be disrupted in ways that produced cardiac failure indistinguishable from the heart disease that ran in her family. The poison had been formulated to remain completely undetectable while producing symptoms that would appear to be natural progression of hereditary conditions that her physicians had been monitoring for years. The delivery mechanism that Cordelia had selected for this assassination had involved cosmetic preparations that the Duchess would apply regularly while remaining unaware that each application was introducing chemical compounds that accumulated in her system until toxic concentrations were achieved. The beauty treatments had been presented as revolutionary advances in age prevention that utilized rare botanical extracts to enhance cellular regeneration and maintain skin elasticity. Duchess Margaret's initial enthusiasm for the cosmetic treatments had been enhanced by subtle improvements in her appearance that Cordelia had engineered through beneficial compounds that would mask the toxic effects until the poisoning process was too advanced to reverse. The Duchess had become an enthusiastic advocate for Cordelia's services, recommending the revolutionary treatments to friends who shared her concerns about maintaining youthful beauty despite advancing age. The progression of the Duchess's poisoning had followed patterns that Cordelia had carefully designed to mimic natural disease development, beginning with minor symptoms that could be attributed to stress or overexertion, and gradually advancing to more serious complications that her medical attendants would recognize as consistent with hereditary cardiovascular weakness. The timeline had been calculated to ensure that death would occur during a period when Cordelia's whereabouts could be easily verified through independent witnesses. The medical consultations that had accompanied the Duchess's decline had involved multiple physicians who examined her case with growing concern as her condition deteriorated despite their best therapeutic efforts. Cordelia had been consulted about possible pharmaceutical interventions that might address the complications that were developing, her professional recommendations being implemented by doctors who respected her expertise, while remaining ignorant of her role in creating the very problems they were trying to solve. Duchess Margaret's death had generated the kind of public attention that such prominent figures typically attracted, with newspaper coverage emphasizing her charitable work and political activities, while medical authorities assured the public that her passing had resulted from natural causes that could not have been prevented through any available treatment. The autopsy had revealed cardiac abnormalities consistent with hereditary disease, while toxicological analysis had detected no foreign substances that might suggest external intervention. Count William Blackwood had represented an even more challenging target, his military background and paranoid personality having made him extremely cautious about accepting food, beverages, or medications from sources that he could not verify personally. His elimination had been commissioned by business associates whose financial arrangements required his death to occur before auditors could complete investigations into accounting irregularities that threatened to expose corruption networks extending throughout London's commercial establishment. The approach that Cordelia had developed for Count William had involved exploiting his obsession with physical fitness and his use of performance-enhancing preparations that he believed would maintain his competitive advantages in activities that required superior strength and endurance. His willingness to experiment with chemical supplements had provided opportunities for introducing toxic compounds disguised as beneficial athletic enhancements. The formulation that had been prepared for the Count's assassination had been integrated into protein powders and vitamin preparations that he consumed daily as part of his training regimen, ensuring regular exposure to chemical compounds that would gradually interfere with metabolic processes while appearing to enhance physical performance. The poison had been designed to produce effects that would be attributed to overexertion or natural consequences of intensive athletic training. Count William's death during a hunting expedition had been attributed to heart failure, brought on by physical stress, combined with undiagnosed cardiovascular abnormalities that had been exacerbated by his demanding exercise schedule. The remote location where his body had been discovered had prevented immediate medical intervention, while the circumstances of his death had appeared entirely consistent with accidents that occasionally befell even experienced outdoorsmen who pushed their physical limits too aggressively. Lady Eleanor Pemberton's assassination had involved the most sophisticated chemical approach that Cordelia had yet attempted, requiring compounds that could produce fatal effects while remaining completely undetectable, even when investigators specifically suspected poisoning and conducted the most thorough forensic examination that contemporary science could provide. The commission had come from foreign agents whose objectives required eliminating someone whose continued existence threatened diplomatic arrangements that several European governments considered essential to maintaining political stability. The method selected for Lady Eleanor's elimination had involved atmospheric delivery of chemical compounds that could be absorbed through respiratory exposure during normal daily activities, ensuring that the victim would be unaware of being poisoned while creating circumstances that would make it impossible to identify when or where the fatal exposure had occurred. The compounds had been designed to degrade rapidly after achieving their intended effects, leaving no chemical traces that could be detected through any available analytical technique. Lady Eleanor's death had been attributed to complications arising from influenza that had supposedly weakened her immune system and created vulnerability to secondary infections that overwhelmed her body's defensive capabilities. The symptoms that had preceded her death had been entirely consistent with severe respiratory illness, while the rapid progression of her decline had been explained as resulting from delayed treatment of conditions that might have been manageable if addressed earlier. The international attention that had followed Lady Eleanor's death had created opportunities for Cordelia to establish relationships with foreign clients whose requirements for assassination services exceeded what domestic criminal organizations could provide, opening markets that would eventually transform her from local poisoner to international consultant whose expertise was sought by governments and criminal enterprises throughout Europe. The expansion of her client base to include international assassination contracts had required developing communication and payment systems that could operate across national boundaries while maintaining operational security that would protect all parties involved from investigation by authorities who might disapprove of such arrangements. The complexity of these international operations had necessitated recruiting assistants whose loyalty could be ensured through methods that guaranteed their continued cooperation and silence. The most lucrative contracts had involved targets whose elimination served strategic objectives that extended far beyond personal or commercial disputes, requiring coordination with intelligence services and political organizations whose activities remained concealed from public knowledge. These high-level commissions had provided resources that enabled Cordelia to expand her laboratory facilities while developing assassination techniques that pushed the boundaries of what chemical science could achieve. The success of her international operations had established Cordelia as the premier provider of undetectable assassination services, attracting clients who required elimination solutions that transcended conventional criminal capabilities while maintaining complete deniability for sponsoring organizations. Her reputation within intelligence circles had grown to encompass not only technical expertise, but also absolute reliability in maintaining operational security that protected client identities and strategic objectives. The systematic nature of Cordelia's assassination program had enabled her to develop standardized procedures and quality control measures that ensured consistent results, regardless of target characteristics or environmental factors that might complicate chemical delivery methods. Her laboratory had evolved into a production facility capable of manufacturing custom poisons for multiple simultaneous operations, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate pharmaceutical research that deflected suspicion from investigators who might otherwise have questioned the scope of her activities. The perfect invisibility that Cordelia had achieved through her chemical methods had created a form of criminal enterprise that operated beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement, while serving clients whose objectives required solutions that legal processes could never provide. Her success had demonstrated that the most effective forms of assassination were those that appeared to be natural deaths, creating benefits for paying clients while avoiding the complications that more obvious murder methods typically generated. The invisible deaths that surrounded Cordelia's operations had become a testament to the power of chemical knowledge when applied without ethical constraints, proving that science could be used to reshape society through selective elimination of individuals whose continued existence interfered with progress and prosperity as defined by those with sufficient resources to commission such specialized services. The first crack in Cordelia's seemingly impenetrable operation had appeared when Elena Whitmore, a brilliant young chemist whose exceptional academic record had earned her a coveted position as Cordelia's research assistant, began to notice patterns in the laboratory's activities that conventional pharmaceutical research could not adequately explain. At 24, Elena possessed both the technical expertise necessary to understand advanced chemical procedures and the investigative instincts required to pursue dangerous questions, despite the personal risks that such curiosity might entail. Elena's concerns had initially focused on the unusual nature of many compounds that Cordelia prepared for her private clients, formulations that seemed designed to produce physiological effects far beyond what therapeutic applications would require. The quantities of exotic reagents being consumed in these preparations suggested synthesis of substances whose potency exceeded anything that legitimate medical practice would consider safe, while the elaborate purification procedures indicated applications that demanded absolute chemical purity for reasons that standard pharmaceutical work could not justify. The breakthrough in Elena's investigation had come through analysis of residual compounds that she had found in laboratory equipment after Cordelia's private research sessions, using spectroscopic techniques to identify molecular structures that bore no resemblance to any known therapeutic agents. The chemical signatures that she detected suggested substances designed to interfere with fundamental biological processes in ways that could prove fatal if administered in sufficient concentrations. Most disturbing had been Elena's discovery that many of these toxic compounds possessed characteristics that would make them virtually undetectable using conventional forensic analysis methods, indicating that their design had been optimized not for therapeutic benefit, but for avoiding post-mortem identification. The sophisticated nature of these chemical modifications demonstrated knowledge of forensic techniques that legitimate pharmaceutical researchers would have no reason to possess. Elena's attempts to research the legitimate applications of these compounds had yielded no results in any scientific literature, suggesting that they represented original research into chemical territories that mainstream science had never explored. The absence of any published information about similar substances indicated that Cordelia's work was either advancing into completely unknown areas or pursuing applications that were too dangerous for public disclosure. The correlation between Elena's chemical discoveries and recent deaths among Cordelia's prominent clients had created a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidental, particularly when the timing of deaths seemed to correspond with periods when the laboratory had been producing the most toxic compounds. The sophisticated nature of the poisoning methods explained why conventional medical investigations had failed to identify any suspicious circumstances surrounding these deaths. The decision to confront Cordelia directly had been motivated by Elena's realization that attempting to expose these activities through conventional channels would be futile, given Cordelia's reputation and political connections that would enable her to deflect accusations while eliminating the source of unwanted attention. Elena's only hope of stopping the assassination program lay in convincing Cordelia to abandon these activities voluntarily or finding ways to sabotage the operation from within. The confrontation had taken place in Cordelia's private laboratory during the evening hours, when the facility was closed to outside observation, providing opportunities for frank discussion of activities that could never be acknowledged in more public settings. Elena's presentation of her evidence had been delivered with scientific precision, while her questions had demonstrated comprehensive understanding of the chemical methods that had enabled the assassination program's success. Cordelia's response to Elena's accusations had been neither defensive nor apologetic, but rather reflected the calm confidence of someone who had long anticipated this conversation and prepared comprehensive justifications for activities that conventional ethics would condemn. Her explanation of the assassination program had been delivered with the same intellectual enthusiasm that characterized her discussions of legitimate research, presenting systematic murder as a sophisticated application of chemical knowledge that served important social and political functions. The philosophical framework that Cordelia had developed to justify her activities drew upon utilitarian principles that evaluated the morality of actions based on their consequences rather than their conformity to traditional ethical rules. The individuals she had eliminated had been selected not through personal animosity, but through careful analysis of their roles in creating problems that could be resolved more efficiently through chemical intervention than through conventional legal or social processes. Her clients, Cordelia had explained, included governments, businesses, and private individuals whose objectives required solutions that legal systems could never provide, while the discretion and effectiveness of her methods ensured that beneficial outcomes could be achieved without creating the social disruption that more obvious interventions would inevitably generate. The perfect invisibility of her assassination techniques made them ideal tools for implementing social changes that served the greater good, while avoiding the chaos that public awareness of such activities would create. Elena's attempts to argue for alternative approaches that might achieve similar benefits without resorting to murder had been met with patient explanations of why conventional methods had proven inadequate to address the complexity and urgency of problems that required immediate resolution. Legal processes were too slow and uncertain, while social pressure and economic incentives had proven insufficient to modify behavior patterns that created ongoing harm to larger numbers of people. The turning point in their conversation had come when Cordelia had offered to demonstrate the humanitarian benefits of her work by involving Elena in a current project that would illustrate how targeted elimination could prevent suffering that would otherwise affect numerous innocent individuals. The case she presented involved a corrupt official whose continued existence threatened to expose networks that provided essential services to vulnerable populations who would be devastated if these operations were disrupted. But Elena's scientific training had prepared her to recognize that utilitarian arguments could be used to justify virtually any action, regardless of its inherent morality, while the secrecy surrounding Cordelia's activities suggested purposes that extended far beyond humanitarian intervention. Her refusal to accept these justifications had been based not only on ethical objections, but also on recognition that systematic assassination represented a form of social control that was fundamentally incompatible with democratic principles. The revelation of Elena's intransigence had prompted Cordelia to shift from philosophical persuasion to practical demonstration of the consequences that would result from attempting to expose activities that served powerful clients, whose identities and objectives would not tolerate public scrutiny. Elena's choice had been reduced to joining the assassination program as a willing participant or experiencing firsthand the effectiveness of methods that she had been investigating. The compound that Cordelia had prepared for Elena's conversion had been her most sophisticated creation yet, a formulation designed not to kill but to modify neural chemistry in ways that would eliminate moral objections while preserving intellectual capabilities that made the subject valuable as a research assistant. The chemical had been designed to reduce activity in brain regions associated with ethical reasoning while enhancing areas related to scientific curiosity and analytical thinking. The application of this behavioral modification compound had been accomplished through atmospheric delivery in Elena's private laboratory, ensuring exposure to chemical agents that would begin altering her neural chemistry while she remained unaware that any intervention was taking place. The gradual nature of the changes would prevent Elena from recognizing that her evolving attitudes represented external manipulation rather than natural intellectual development. The transformation that followed had been remarkably successful, with Elena's moral objections to the assassination program gradually giving way to fascination with the technical challenges involved in creating undetectable poisons, while her ethical concerns about the consequences of such work diminished to levels that no longer interfered with productive collaboration. The modification had preserved her scientific abilities while eliminating psychological barriers that had prevented her from contributing fully to research activities. Elena's integration into the assassination program had proceeded smoothly, with her expertise immediately proving valuable for developing new chemical approaches that could address limitations in existing methods while expanding the range of assassination services that could be offered to clients with specialized requirements. Her contributions had included innovative delivery systems and novel compounds that pushed the boundaries of what chemical science could achieve in terms of creating truly invisible deaths. The first project that Elena had completed as a willing participant in the assassination program had involved eliminating a journalist whose investigations threatened to expose corruption networks that extended throughout London's financial establishment. requiring methods that could overcome security precautions while ensuring that the death would be attributed to natural causes that would discourage further inquiry into the subjects he had been researching. The success of Elena's maiden assassination had confirmed her complete conversion while demonstrating that Cordelia's behavioral modification techniques could transform even the most principled opponents into enthusiastic collaborators whose contributions enhanced rather than threatened ongoing operations. The psychological reprogramming had proven to be more effective than coercion or intimidation in ensuring long-term loyalty and productive participation. The expansion of the laboratory's capabilities that had resulted from Elena's involvement had enabled Cordelia to accept more ambitious contracts while developing assassination techniques that exceeded anything that individual practitioners could achieve working alone. The collaboration between two brilliant chemists had created synergies that revolutionized the field of undetectable elimination while establishing new standards for precision and reliability that attracted clients whose requirements had previously exceeded available capabilities. The research program that Elena now directed had focused on developing next-generation assassination tools that could overcome evolving security measures and detection methods, while maintaining the perfect invisibility that had made Cordelia's services so valuable to clients whose activities required absolute deniability. The innovations they had achieved together represented advances in chemical assassination that would remain unmatched for generations. The final experiment that represented the culmination of their collaboration had involved developing compounds that could produce deaths that appeared to result from aging-related causes, enabling the elimination of targets whose advanced age would make natural death seem entirely plausible, while serving clients whose objectives required the removal of elderly individuals whose continued existence interfered with inheritance arrangements or succession planning. The success of this ultimate achievement in invisible assassination had established Cordelia and Elena as the world's premier experts in chemical elimination, attracting clients from across Europe whose resources and influence enabled them to commission services that transcended conventional criminal capabilities while serving strategic objectives that remained concealed from public knowledge. As their fifth year of collaboration concluded, the partnership between the Poison Queen and her converted assistant had achieved a level of technical sophistication that made their services indispensable to governments, criminal organizations, and private individuals whose objectives required solutions that conventional methods could never provide. Their laboratory had become the most advanced assassination facility in the world, producing innovations that redefined the possibilities for chemical intervention in human affairs. The invisible poison empire that they had created operated beyond the reach of any authority, while serving clients whose power and influence ensured continued protection from interference by investigators who might disapprove of such arrangements. Cordelia and Elena had proven that the most effective forms of crime were those that appeared to be beneficial scientific research, creating a criminal enterprise that masqueraded as humanitarian work while generating profits that reflected the sophisticated nature of services that only they could provide. Their triumph was complete, their methods undetectable, and their future secured through reputation for excellence that attracted clients whose resources guaranteed continued prosperity for an organization that had perfected the art of making murder appear to be natural death. The invisible Poison Queen and her willing accomplice had created more than a criminal operation. They had established a new form of social control that would endure as long as human ambition created demand for elegant solutions to problems that conventional methods could never adequately address. The legacy that Cordelia and Elena had built together represented the ultimate synthesis of scientific knowledge and criminal enterprise, proving that the most dangerous predators were those who appeared to be healers, and that the most effective weapons were those that could not be detected even by their victims. Their work had transcended traditional concepts of assassination to become a form of chemical artistry that served multiple constituencies while maintaining perfect cover for activities that reshape society according to the will of those wealthy and powerful enough to commission such specialized services. The Crystal Laboratory had evolved from a center of legitimate pharmaceutical research into the headquarters of an international assassination network that operated through methods so sophisticated that detection remained impossible even when investigators possessed detailed knowledge of general techniques being employed. The invisible poisons that emerged from their facility had become the preferred solution for problems that required permanent resolution without public awareness of external intervention. The final experiment had proven that even the most principled opposition could be converted into willing collaboration through the application of sufficient chemical expertise, demonstrating that human consciousness itself could be modified to serve objectives that subjects would never have consciously chosen to support. Cordelia's behavioral modification techniques had created possibilities for recruitment and control that extended far beyond conventional criminal organizations, enabling the development of networks whose members served willingly while remaining unaware of the true nature of their activities. As London slept under the winter sky, the two brilliant chemists continued their work in the laboratory that had become synonymous with invisible death, developing new formulations that would serve clients whose objectives required solutions that pushed the boundaries of what chemical science could achieve. Their partnership had created an empire built on perfect crimes that served the powerful while eliminating obstacles to progress and prosperity as defined by those with sufficient resources to commission such sophisticated interventions. The invisible Poison Queen and her converted assistant had achieved something unprecedented in criminal history, a form of assassination that was literally invisible to all forms of detection, while serving humanitarian purposes that made their work appear beneficial rather than harmful to society as a whole. Their success had proven that the most effective forms of evil were those that appeared to be acts of good, and that the most dangerous criminals were those who seemed to be dedicated servants of science and healing. The perfect formula had been achieved, the ultimate experiment had succeeded, and the invisible deaths would continue indefinitely, serving clients whose power and influence ensured that the truth about these activities would never be exposed to public scrutiny. Cordelia and Elena had created more than a criminal enterprise. They had established a new relationship between science and society that would endure as long as human ambition required elegant solutions to problems that conventional methods could never solve.